I want to welcome you to our final question of Christmas. In the month of December, we've talked about the question of Mary, the question of Joseph, the question of the shepherds, but lastly today, we're going to consider the questions of the wise men to conclude the Christmas story. I'm reading from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 2 and verse 1. Now, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem. They said, "Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him." When Herod the king heard these things, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. But when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes and people together, he demanded of them where the Christ would be born. And they said to him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it's written by the prophet, and thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel." What an incredible story it is of these so-called wise men. We don't know all that much about them. Apparently they were Gentiles, probably from Persia, and they didn't come to Jesus on the night of his birth like the shepherds. There's a confusion perhaps when we have Sunday school plays or church plays that right on the heels of the arrival of the shepherds, when they leave, here comes the wise men. It was probably many weeks afterwards. Joseph and Mary are no longer in a stable. They've moved into a house, a small stone house, for her to regain her strength before they move on from that place. But I want you to notice they were given a special sign from God, and it was a star in the sky. Somehow these men, probably astrologers of some stripe, understood that this star was the acknowledgement of a new Jewish king, the King of the Jews, the Messiah. And so they followed that star. It was their GPS. It was their guide all the way to the city of Jerusalem, and assuming that a king would be born in a palace, they go to the palace in Jerusalem seeking the newborn King of the Jews. Three things we learned from the wise men in these verses. First is that these magi, as they're called, another word for wise men, were seeking after a king. They assumed that a baby king would be born in a palace, so they went to the capital of Israel, Jerusalem, but they really went to the wrong place, and they asked the wrong person, where was the King of the Jews born? Because they go to the palace of Herod, who claimed himself to be the King of the Jews. Let me just say this. Oftentimes, people, even of goodwill and motive, who are seeking an encounter with God, simply go to the wrong place and they ask the wrong person. Asking your skeptical, cynical friends, how do I get to know God, or is there a God? You probably made a mistake. You went to the wrong place. You went to the wrong source. Probably finding somebody who lives a life that seems godly and is kind and is thoughtful. Maybe they belong to a church and they try to live by the Bible. Ask that person, how do I get to know King Jesus? Well, these magi were first of all seeking a king. Secondly, the magi had been seeking a king, but they come to Herod, and he is afraid of the king, and because of jealousy, he wants to destroy this baby king, who he considered a pretender to his throne. Now, let me give you a little historical context. This Herod is Herod the Great. He was called king by the Roman Senate because of pressure from Mark Antony. He was a cruel man, a crafty man, sometimes a brutal man. Even with his own family, he had 9 different marriages, and he murdered his wife and 2 of his brothers who he thought were being treasonous and wanted to take his position on the throne. He was very paranoid, but he knew no limit to his own evil. He was also not a full-blown Jew, although he wanted to be called the King of the Jews. In fact, he was what is called an Idumean. He was a descendant of Esau. You remember? Jacob and Esau, the twin brothers, and Esau married women who were not of the Jewish culture. These are his descendants that leads several hundred years after to this man called Herod the Great. And he was a carnal, evil man, not a spiritual and godly man. The Magi, thirdly, are seeking a king. Herod is opposing the king, but here's the saddest part of these verses. The Jewish priests were ignoring the king. The Jewish priests were ignoring the king. When the Magi asked, where is this new king? Herod didn't know. He didn't really know the scriptures, the Old Testament, the prophets. So he brought in scribes, Jewish religious teachers, and he said, well, where is this so-called king of the Jews? Where is he born? And they knew right away. They knew the prophecy of Isaiah or Micah over in Bethlehem, 5 miles from here. And so that's where the Magi go. That's where they walk 5 miles from Jerusalem to find and seek out the king. The Jewish scribes went home and had supper. They had no interest in pursuing the King of the Jews, the Messiah, the Christ, the Savior of the world. And so I want to close with this. How Jesus was born was a fulfillment of prophecy. A virgin, Isaiah 7:14, conceived and bore a son. Where he was born, a fulfillment of prophecy. Scriptures tell us that he would be born in Bethlehem, which means house of bread. And Jesus would be called the bread of life. I want you to know, if you search for the King today, you'll find him. If in your heart you search for King Jesus and allow him to come into your life and change it, I promise you, if you'll but seek him, you will find him, and he will change your life.